Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for the podcast edition of True Crime and Wine. And I'm pleased that you've joined us for this unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers while we enjoy a glass of award-winning wine. So, why serial killers and wine? Well, the answer is simple. I'm the only winemaker in the world who's captured a serial killer. So this is real true crime and real wine. And each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, which you can also hear on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and all of your favorite podcast platforms, will join me. And together, we're going to take you on a journey profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from around the world, all while enjoying some of our favorite wines. I've got my favorite Casaro wine. Today it's Tempranillo. And we'll talk more about that a little later. So we invite you to pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And as always, make sure you share the show on Facebook or your favorite platform with your friends and other true crime lovers. Like it, subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. And get ready to enjoy real true crime and real wine. Welcome to True Crime and Wine, and today we're going to bring you the story of Andrei Chikatilo. And I know I'm not pronouncing the Russian properly, but that's as close as I can get, Brandy. And Andrei, we'll call him Andrei, grew up in poverty in a small Russian village during the Joseph Stalin reign. He lived in a one-room shack, and he even testified to the fact that he was only fed grass and leaves sometimes to stave off hunger. He said he witnessed the atrocities of war in Nazi-occupied Russia and was beat during that time by his mother for wetting the bed. He was certainly traumatized by what he saw with the Nazi troops and even watched as his mother was raped by German soldiers. She later gave birth to a child, and she berated and beat that child for what had happened to her. Now, Andrei was small and skinny and weak from starvation, and often he wore rags to school. And like it is in so many cultures, he was, bullied because of how he looked and how he smelled and how weak he was, and he was even beaten by some of the other children. But he showed to be an excellent student. And as Andrei grew, he had to latch onto something, and what he latched onto was the Communist Party. And by the time he was a teenager, Andrei was an ardent communist. Matter of fact, he was appointed editor of the school newspaper and organized street marches for students. Behind his calm and cool exterior and his leadership, even as a teenager in the Communist Party, he had chronic impotence and sexually assaulted his first victim, an 11-year-old girl, while he was still in high school. And so from the very beginning, we see a really rough upbringing here.
Yeah, we've seen this before, starting in poverty, being beat, humiliated, wearing rags to school, going and smelling, beaten up, bullied because of the way they look and the way that, they're presenting. I think about the bedwetting, right? So trauma, depending on how sometimes as bedwetting can continue through, adolescence going into young teenage years because of the experiences they had. So, whether it was what they were dealing with in Russia at the time, or whatever his mother was doing to him, and the other child. I mean, just terrible, but not uncommon in the cases we've covered.
No, matter of fact, the pig farmer, one of our other podcasts, we saw the same thing. He came to school in rags, right?
Yeah.
And smelled of the farm and of pigs and was bullied by the other kids. We've seen it actually in several of our shows. And here, I think, is an extreme example of Nazi-occupied Russia, the famine that existed at the time, the lack of food. And I can't even begin to imagine how horrible that was. Literally eating grass to survive at some points in his life. And yet still, none of it can turn somebody into being a serial killer. And he was miswired from the very beginning in high school, committing his very first sexual assault.
Now, John, I'm surprised when I read that he was rejected for college, but yet he was very intelligent, did well, like you said, the editor of the newspaper. So what else do we know about his background?
Well, after he was rejected for college, and it might have been he was a studious student or a good student in the, the small high school he went to, but simply couldn't make it into the college environment. So he entered the military. He actually served as a border guard and served in the Communist Party. So we see this trend continuing, that he was active as a youth, active in high school. Now he joins the military and becomes an active member in the Communist Party, which he's going to tactically use that to his advantage later on. Now, after he returned home from the military, he entered a prearranged marriage and somehow had 2 children, even though he was still primarily impotent. He did get into some correspondence classes. Still wasn't able to get into a college, but earned 4 mail order degrees, right?
Right.
And then with those degrees, he taught at a local school. But his failure to control himself with students that ridiculed him landed him back out of the school again. After about 10 years of being married, and certainly things could have gone on during this, we know that he began sexually assaulting young girls at his school. Where, believe it or not, so now you've got a guy that the school suspects is got problems with the girls, but his duty was to make sure the girls were in the dorm at night.
Yeah, I don't understand that piece of it. And observed by other teachers touching himself in front of these girls. I mean, you have people witnessing his behavior. So yeah, very bizarre.
Yeah, and he was sexually assaulted, at least 2 of them, in his classroom, but was never disciplined. So other teachers know about this behavior, and yet nothing's being done. Finally, after numerous complaints, he resigned, but then repeated the exact same process in at least 2 other schools. So now he's married, he's got 2 children, but he's sexually assaulting young girls in these schools where he is a teacher. They're looking at him, to be an example, a leader, someone they can trust, and he's preying on these young girls. Later told investigators, I learned to give packets of gum to the young girls. That would lure them away where I could assault them.
So we talk about we talk about profiling, whether it's the crime scene, victimology, the MO background. I see a lot of similarities, John, and other cases that we've covered, the background piece, learning the communication skills you need to be able to lure these girls away. He starts with gum. It's going to get, I'm sure, to alcohol at some point, depending on, we're going to talk about this victimology. But what is standing out to you right now? I mean, you've done these kinds of cases. What's standing out?
Yeah, to me, you're exactly right. Victimology is what's standing out. He's going after a certain victim. We saw that he sexually assaulted an 11-year-old female when he was in high school. I think he learned that was going to be his primary victim pool because he starts teaching at these schools. Again, we see that happen with a lot of pedophiles. They put themselves in situations where they have access to young people. Whether it's at camps, summer camps, schools, recreation centers, we see it all the time. He put himself right in the middle. So he's a married man, 2 kids. He's teaching at not 1, not 2, but 3 different schools where we know he's sexually assaulting these young girls. So to me, we really don't know crime scenes yet. We don't know a whole lot about geography. We know a little bit about his background. Does he, could he be a serial rapist? Certainly. Could he be a serial pedophile? Certainly. Hasn't killed anybody to this point, but certainly from a victimology profiling standpoint, it is definitely young girls. And, that just terrifies anyone that has a daughter or a granddaughter that's in school, knowing that these people are out there and they're everywhere.
Yeah, they are everywhere. I mean, and how many times, John, do we see serial killers that are married and have children, right? And their children realize who they've been living with all of these years. But we do have our first victim in September of 1978. And John, this is a 9-year-old girl.
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. He picks the youngest girls, it seems, starting with that 11-year-old, assaulting the other young ones. But this is a 9-year-old girl. He lured her into a small wooden hut that he had secretly purchased. Again, he's not making a lot of money, but he's got enough money that he purchases this wooden hut without his wife ever even knowing about it. And it was down by a river nearby in town. He tried to rape the 9-year-old, but he failed to perform. Was upset, strangled her, and stabbed her multiple times before throwing her in the river. Now, this is September 1978, and from everything that we've garnered, this is his first murder. So now he's actually elevated from serial rapist to murderer, and I think the lust is just starting to go. They did find the young girl's body 2 days later. Her backpack was found right near his shack. He didn't even try to dispose of the backpack. And a witness came forward and said, I saw them together right before the murder. But he was an educated man. He was a teacher. He was a husband and a father of 2. So police totally dismissed him as a suspect. As a matter of fact, they focused on a known rapist and murderer who lived in the area. They forced him to confess, and they eventually executed the guy for a crime he never committed. So we see not only a missed opportunity, but what a miscarriage of justice.
Well, as I was going through this case and looking at this was one of the first pieces that stuck out. Somebody takes the fall for the crime, confesses, put to death. I mean, there were so many people affected by his crimes that weren't even directly involved with them. So that is something I picked up with this guy as I'm looking through this. John, I want to touch on the impotence for a minute. The sexual assault with the impotence, with your background and what you know about shame, male, how men feel about that. Is there an urge to do something they're not able to do? Is it the anger? Is it because they can't perform? Does that just anger them because they've lived with it? He's lived with this his entire life, it seems like. I mean, at a very young age, he knew he was having impotence. So just want to kind of get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that really fuels the rage. And I think in this situation, he felt like, okay, I've got a victim. I've got, he went as far as buying a wooden shack. I wouldn't really call it a house, but he bought a wooden shack. Why did he buy the shack? The same reason other serial killers outfit their van is killing machines, right? He knew he was going to lure little girls there and he was going to rape them. I think, though, that him being impotent, he probably flew into a rage, was mad at himself, hated himself, and he took it out on the little girl. And I think you see that not only with the strangulation, but the multiple stab wounds. I'm sorry, a little 9-year-old girl.
I know.
Not only would she be fairly easy to strangle to death, but there'd be no reason to do the overkill of the stab wounds and then disposing her in the river. That was fueled by rage that I think was spurred on by his impotence.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. But we have victim number 2, Larissa, in September of 1981. She's 17 years old, John, and then she's again lured by him, but with vodka, to and near the river, right? Was he trying to take her back to his wooden shed?
Yeah. And there's a fairly large gap here. And I think, like we've talked about in previous shows, the gap is victims that we don't know about. These guys don't just go, I'll quit being a rapist, I'll quit being a murderer, right? He has graduated in age. Remember, his first victim was 11. He sexually assaulted many other young girls. The young girl in the wooden hut was very young, but he's changing now. A 17-year-old. Well, you're probably not going to lure a 17-year-old with bubble gum, right, Brandy? And what does he lure with? Vodka. And you were exactly right. We see these guys. It's what do they think the girls want? Do they want drugs? Do they want alcohol? What do they want? They're going to try to promise them anything. He again attempted to rape her, but failed at intercourse. And it sent him into a rage once again. He shoved mud down her mouth to muffle her screams before beating her with a 6-foot stick and strangling her to death. This time, however, he had no knife, so he mutilated her with his teeth. And once again, and we've seen this over and over, where did he attack? Like many, many killers, the number one area on the body is the nipples. He actually tore them off of his victim. He then loosely covered her with leaves and branches, but she was easily found the next day. So now we start looking at body disposal. He wasn't trying to cover up his crime, was he?
No, not trying to cover it up. Weapons of opportunity, right? 6-foot stick, using his hands to strangle her, beating her, with his fists, no knife. So he's a little messy. I don't know if he's now having it's a victim of opportunity or if he was following or targeting. I don't know if we're quite there with the victimology just quite yet. But I mean, the teeth, tearing off the nipples. I mean, that's just so much anger and rage and hate for women.
I've got to believe, Brandy, that he really thought he could perform. He brought vodka, right? He didn't bring a knife. So we don't see, like most organized killers, him bringing weapons. So I think that in his mind, he really thought that he could rape her and perform because he brought the vodka to lure her to the river. But then when he couldn't, just like with the other victim, he flew into a rage and grabbed whatever he could, which happened to be a stick, and strangled her and beat her to death before mutilating her with his teeth, basically.
Yeah. And again, covering her loosely with branches and leaves. I mean, not trying to hide her, just disregard of like getting rid of trash. That's that's kind of way it feels.
Yeah, and from a profiling standpoint, he certainly, didn't put her on display for anybody to see, but at the same time, he didn't make a whole lot of effort because she was found the next day. And they even said she was loosely covered with leaves and branches. So he just discarded her to move on to his next victim.
Well, his next victim, John, is 9 months later in June of 1982. Let's talk about victim number 3.
Yeah, and victim number 3, Burncook, was, by this time, he was traveling around by bus and train. He was no longer an educator. He was no longer tied down to his school. He was actually a buyer for a manufacturing company, and his job paid for him to take buses and trains around Russia. So this very well could tie into why there are gaps in his timeline, because there probably simply weren't bodies that were tied to him because he was in such a large geographic area. He did target a young girl that had walked away from a bus stop. She was carrying some shopping bags, a 13-year-old girl. He engaged her in small talk. He walked with her for about a quarter mile before he pushed her in some bushes, tore off her dress, and attempted to rape her. But again, when he was unable to do it, he went into an uncontrollable rage, stabbing her and slashing her to death. Her body wasn't found for 2 weeks, and the medical examiner noted 22 stab wounds to the neck, the head, the chest, and the pelvic area. He also noted that her eyes had been slashed. So now we see he's traveling by bus and train. He does have a weapon with him. So maybe he learned something from the last murder that we know of, because he's back to carrying a knife. But again, it seems like total overkill on this young 13-year-old girl.
Yeah, I would agree. 22 stab wounds to the head, neck, chest. Okay, so let's talk about the eyes. This is new. Noted that both eyes had been slashed. Maybe looking at him, maybe there's some shame in watching what he's doing. That's kind of where my mind goes a little bit.
Yeah, shame in that he can't perform.
Yep.
How about that?
Yep.
Doesn't want
in
her to see
anger, right? Oh, yes, John. I didn't even think about the fact that he didn't want her to see that. Yes, good point. Good point on that.
Yep.
But 13 years old, and again, walking home with shopping bags, just an opportunity. I'm worried about this guy. We've covered serial killers that travel, right? And we say there's probably more victims than we know about because of that travel. So he's already starting to just target again and attack just randomly.
Yeah, and we see a younger girl this time, probably because he realized, hey, I can't carry vodka everywhere, right? But I can carry a knife with me. And I firmly believe that this guy at least felt that he could sexually perform. And every time he couldn't, we see this. So does that mean that there are dozens of maybe other young girls that he simply raped and let go? Or maybe he raped them and killed them and left them, but they weren't added to his body count because they were never connected to him. Brandy, I'm so thankful to all of our listeners out there, and we want our family of true crime lovers to continue to grow. So we ask everybody to make sure that you like us or subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, or whatever your favorite podcast platform is. And be sure to share the show with your friends and other true crime lovers, because this is the only place where you get real true crime and real wine. Salud.
Okay, John, so we now have murders number 4 through number 8 between July and September of 1982. So I'm seeing a smaller timeline, more victims. So what do we know about these victims?
Yeah, you're right. It's a very condensed timeline now, and where we're seeing victims every single month. 5 victims here. All of them during this time were between 9 and 18 years old. They were runaways, vagrants, or children that he would find at bus or rail stations. Remember, he traveled around. He was like a traveling salesman purchasing supplies for his company. He would seek out a young girl in the same trade, take them to a nearby forest or other secluded area, and most of the time it was within 100 yards of the bus or the rail station. He would stab them, slash them, and eviscerate them with his knife. So again, he's carrying that knife with him. He'd strangle them or beat them to death. He would also slash or gouge out their eyes. And when he attempted to rape them but failed is when he continued to fly into this murderous rage, and he achieved pleasure now, not through sex, but we really believe by stabbing and killing his victims.
So the eyes and the gouging, right? We saw this in the eyeball killer. Eyeball killer was more precise, knew how to remove them really without anybody noticing till the autopsy. But this guy is then slashing and gouging. Are they looking at him? Does he not want them to see what's happening? His anger, his impotence, he's trying to perform. Are they laughing at him? I think about this too, right? Like, are they shaming him in some way, which makes him fly into a rage? John, I think, I try to think about the fact that he flies into a murderous rage when he can't perform. But it's not like he doesn't know he can't perform. It's not like he's been performing and all of a sudden he can't and now he's turning into a murderous rage. It's like you said, it's something setting him off with these. Because he knows this about himself, right? But then, then how do you get in this murderous rage every time it happens? It's kind of mind-boggling a little bit.
Or he's raping women at a much higher degree, but these are the ones that he's killing because he can't perform. And, he's pulling them into the woods. He's pulling them into a secluded area, kind of separating them from the crowd. He gets off at the bus station or the rail station and scans everybody until he sees a young girl that he thinks he can lure away with gum, with vodka, with anything else, maybe engaging them in conversation like he did the one girl and saying, oh yeah, I'm walking that way. I'll walk with you so that you'll be safe. These young girls, walking home alone, see a guy and go, oh, okay, maybe he's going to protect me until he drags them into the woods. I think the eyes, though, we're really seeing at this point his shame coming out, his anger coming out, and this is one of the ways that he handles it.
Again, part of just the MO, right? His MO, his victimology. I'm going to say 9 years old seems to be the youngest so far, but then we've got 18-year-old seems to be the oldest so far. So a wide range. And I wonder how he's choosing them. Are they walking by themselves? Do they look like you said, runaways, vagrants? Do they look like nobody's looking for them? Right? We always talk about that and going after prostitutes. People think they're not going to worry about them or care about them. Nobody's going to report them missing. Nobody's going to miss them. So what are you profiling now with him at this point? What are you seeing and witnessing?
From victimology, he certainly is scanning the crowd on the bus, on the rail car. He's staying there at the rail station maybe for hours, and he's watching these young girls. And if they look like they're alone, if they look like they're homeless, if they look like they're a prostitute, he has definitely culled down his victim pool to young girls that he believes he can lure away. His crime scenes. He really doesn't care where he does this. He just wants to get alone with them enough where he can silence them, rape them, and then kill them. So we certainly see his comfort zone is really anywhere he can drag or walk or talk these girls into a secluded area on their own. And he's really getting this down. When you're talking about this number of victims in such a short period of time, he knows exactly he's on the prowl. And to me, he's one of these sexual predators that's always hunting, always looking for victims. And he spends hours doing it and then kills.
Yeah. Well, we have murder number 9 in 1982, John, of Olga, a 10-year-old girl. What do we know about Olga?
Well, he really is into overkill mode now. And this is where we think this isn't about sex. This is about murder, and this is about torture, and this is about mutilation. So we always talk, Brandy, about serial killers evolving. He certainly has evolved from his bubblegum days, where he used overkill with simply stabbing his victim. He then went to slashing their eyes, gouging their eyes out. But with this 10-year-old, he takes her into a nearby cornfield, stabs her over 50 times. We're talking a little 10-year-old girl. He then rips her open and takes her uterus before slashing her eyes and leaving her there in the cornfield.
Okay, so I can see a 17 or 18-year-old laughing at the impotence. I don't know if a 10-year-old even understands, John.
No.
So I don't see her shaming in the way that I could see older young women shaming him. And there's overkill here, 50 times. I mean, she was probably deceased way before the 50. And then you rip her open. I mean, this reminds me of like the Black Dahlia thing. Like you had just ripping it open, taking a uterus, a part of a woman, right?
Yep.
That carries that. I mean, it's just, and then you're slashing the eyes. I mean, just such. Ugh. It's just horrible. He's evolved.
And gone way beyond murder, right? Murder is ancillary at this point. I think the rape is ancillary. I think the murder is ancillary. And he's now getting his high from what he's doing to these girls. But Brandy, unfortunately, we have another missed opportunity. Remember how he was interviewed by police after the very first murder? But they said, he's a educated man, he's a teacher, he's a father, he's a husband. He couldn't have done it. And the poor guy they accused of doing it and forced to confess, they ended up executing. With this 10-year-old girl, he was seen getting off the bus with her. And it was before her usual stop. That's why the witnesses noticed it. And they said, oh no, she usually gets off at stop A, but she got off one before stop A, and she was with a middle-aged man. And they were close enough to give the police a very detailed description. So good that they had an artist that made a rendering of the suspect, and they distributed it around the community, but they couldn't locate him. Well, remember why they couldn't locate him? Because he was a traveling salesman.
Travels.
He got right back on the train. He left the village. He left the community. But now you've got victims that are being found. We're up to number 10, I think. You got victims being found near bus and rail stations all around Russia.
So they have to start piecing things together at this point, John. I want to, before we get there, I want to talk about your profiling for just a second because I think this is important. You mentioned something like that sexual, when we say sexually motivated crimes, because we use that term a lot when we're talking about some of these cases, a lot of people think that means sex. But actually, not necessarily. A sexually motivated crime can be power, it can be control, it can be taking, it can be assaulting. It's just a sexually motivated crime. So it's this guy, I'm not surprised that one piece wasn't enough. And then it just had to escalate, which is why I'm not surprised to see 50 stab wounds at this point. He's not being satisfied. There's something that he's not being able to fulfill in his sociopathic mind with these women. So,
he's not being able to climax. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about in a sexual way. We're talking about getting a high, a gratification. And like a drug addict who needs more and more and more drugs and he needs them more often, he's getting more violent with each and every case, from going from stabbing to mutilating to now removing body parts. So he's not getting the satisfaction he needs, and he's got to do it more and more and more to try to get that high again.
Okay, so are the police onto him now? They have bodies showing up. What are they talking about at this point?
Well, so the individual police really don't have a clue yet, because you've got all these scattered communities over a huge section of Russia. But the main police agency in Russia is starting to get some pressure, because these local agencies are calling and saying something's going on here, because we have a body not far from our train station. We have a body not far from our railroad station. And they're starting to put it together. When Olga's body was found, the police said, well, really, the unusual thing was the stabbing of the eyes. You know, how many times does this go back to the eyes? So she was stabbed and her uterus was removed. But really what they talked about is how her eyes were slashed. And fortunately, that was noted by other jurisdictions. And so you've now got the Central Police Agency in Russia going, uh-oh, we've got a problem here, because we've got a killer that is traveling in this area and slashing eyes. So they're starting now to start putting these cases together. It's taken at least 10 murders that we know of, but they've linked 4 of them by this point.
So at least they're onto him. At least it's the beginning. They're talking about it. But we have 6 more murders between June and September of 1983. And I think this is when they finally realized they're hunting a serial killer, John.
Yeah, and he's not slowing down, right? And they find these murders, but they're kind of thrown off a little bit because they started to hone in on the missing body parts like the uterus. And they said, you know what? We really think this is a satanic cult or a group that's killing women and selling their organs for transplant. And so now they're looking at cults, they're looking at groups, they're looking at organizations, and not so much one person, because they're like, wait, we've got way too many murders here. It can't just be one person. And then if they did consider one person, their theories were, oh, he's got to be a mental patient, because nobody sane would do this. And unfortunately, at this time in Russia, police use different tactics than other places around the world. They actually started rounding up several intellectually disabled youths. Because again, in their mind, no sane person could do this. They rounded them up and had them admit to murders under intense interrogations. And at least 4 of these young people committed suicide after being forced to confess.
We just talked about this guy, John, a man dying for a crime he committed. And then these individuals being questioned and forced to confess to crimes they did not commit. And then you have 4 that commit suicide. I mean, his crimes are just ruining people and lives that he actually has never touched. I mean, that is such a wild thing in this case.
Yeah. And the police are responsible for these deaths directly. And even more unfortunate is as they're rounding up these mentally challenged individuals, forcing them to confess and then seeing them kill themselves, he continues to kill and his body count continues to go up.
So we are in 1984. He kills, okay, John, every month so far, January, February, March. He's seen by witnesses. So what happened? What are we dealing with in 1984?
Well, they finally find a victim, a 10-year-old boy. And witnesses were able to say, we saw this man walking with the 10-year-old boy. By this time, 1984, police are collecting semen and saliva from the victim's clothes, and they find a footprint of the killer at the scene. But they still don't know who it is. He continues to kill. In May, he killed a woman and her 10-year-old daughter. So now he's getting so bold, he's not just killing one person at a time. And from a victimology standpoint, everything's out the window. He pretty much, up to this point, stayed with young girls. Now he's killing boys, he's killing women, he's killing children. And in July, he killed 3 women between 19 and 21, so that age range is rising. And he killed a 13-year-old boy. So he is on a killing spree. In August, he killed a 16 and 17-year-old girl, flew to a business trip, and then killed a woman and her 10-year-old girl before flying home and killing an 11-year-old boy and a 24-year-old librarian. So he killed 4 people in August on an associated business trip. His killing is totally out of control, and he, at this point, I don't think cares who his victims are. It literally could be anybody.
Yeah, that's the first thing I thought of is just, it doesn't matter anymore. I mean, it's just filling that need and to satisfy that craving that he's feeling. And a boy, girl, young, older, he's just kind of all over the place by 1984. So September of 1984, John, 2 undercover officers are working at the bus station. What do they see? What is happening there?
The body count at this point is horrific, right? And it's becoming big news in the media. Law enforcement is under tremendous pressure. They form a task force. They assign undercover officers to every bus station, every rail station that they can, with as many people as they can. These 2 officers actually observe him trying to engage multiple women in conversation and rubbing up against them. Again, we know he's been staking out these rail stations and spends hours there looking for the right victim. They arrest him for assault and they search his bag and they find a knife, rope, and a jar of Vaseline. And he matched the description of the suspect provided by the witnesses. They thought they had everything that they needed.
Yeah, and you have 2 undercover officers that are watching him engage with women. And then...
And a kill kit.
And a kill kit. Does anything happen? Do they bring him in? Do they talk to him?
They arrest him, right? They arrest him for assault.
Okay.
Bring him in. They type his blood, and it comes back A. Now they're really confused because the suspect, the killer, the blood that they had gathered was AB. So officers discovered that he had done a minor theft before. They revoked his Communist Party membership and sentenced him to a year in jail. And he only served 3 months. So because the blood type didn't match who they knew the killer was, they basically had to let him go. They find he had a minor theft charge. They say, okay, we're going to revoke your Communist Party card. You're going to go to jail for a year. He spends a couple months there, and they release him.
Once again, a serial killer behind bars and released. How many times have we talked about that? Yep. So August 1985, John, what's going on in August?
Well, now he travels to Moscow, where he kills 2 more times, stabbing one victim 38 times. Police check all the airline records, but came up empty because he took a train, and trains in those days kept no records. The killer followed the investigation in the media and didn't kill for a year, so the police thought he was dead, in jail, or had moved away. So he was smart. He was smart.
Yeah.
He knew they would be checking the airlines. He took the trains that had no records of him going to Moscow, killing the people, and then returning.
And John, he didn't kill for a year. So he was able to stop himself. Which...
That's what he says. I mean, I find it highly unlikely, but, maybe he was able to control himself for that period. Maybe he felt, wow, I really missed a bullet there. They arrested me. They typed my blood. I still got away with it. So maybe he was feeling like, okay, they're not going to catch me if I lay low for a year. On each episode of True Crime and Wine, we feature one of our Casaro winery brands. And it's fitting to share with everyone what I'm enjoying today, and it's a glass of Tempranillo. Just a great aroma on it. And it's a dry red wine with notes like fruit and cherries and figs. And being a Tempranillo, you can kind of pick up the pepper and spice when you drink it. And for the Tempranillo lovers, and there's lots of them in the Southwest, it really pairs well with barbecue, with carne asada, or fajitas. And it helps to bring out that smoky and spicy flavors of the meats. So, of course, there's no better way to enjoy our wine than listening to the True Crime and Wine podcast. We hope you'll try the Tempranillo. And as always, you can find all of the Casaro winery brands at CasaroWines.com. CASSARO wines.com. And we invite you to order wine. We'll ship it right to you. And you can enjoy it with Brandy and I as you listen or watch True Crime and Wine. Salud. Well, during this time, the police appointed a new prosecutor to head the investigation because the body count was just crazy. And the head of the investigation profiled the killer and said, I think this is somebody that's sexually impotent. I believe he's educated and married. And he actually studied each of the murder sites, where they were located, the days they happened, the times they happened, and based on that, he said he thought the killer worked for a manufacturing company and that the killings were tied to a production schedule, meaning he would go out to buy the products Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. He would have to get those. He could do his killing, and he never did it the other days because he wasn't traveling. So even in 1984, this prosecutor turned out being an amazing profiler, hitting on every aspect of it.
Yeah, he gets all of this right. He's doing all of these things. But the killings began again, 1986 to 1989, John. So what happens during this time frame? Police still on to him?
Well, they're not really, right? He's laid low. They've already released him. It was only a theft charge. That's the only thing in his record. But he did kill in August of 86, 3 more times in 87, all on business trips, all close to train stations, all in wooded areas, but unfortunately, one of the bodies wasn't found until 1991. So it's a combination of his traveling, of the different locations, of some bodies being found, other bodies not being found. In 1988, he killed 3 more times, and in 89, 5 more times. Absolute ridiculous killing spree here.
I don't even know how many victims there are yet right now, John. I mean, I can't. You've got 5, and then 3, and then you've got so many in a 3-month period. But I feel like at this point,
dozens.
Yeah, dozens. And you've got to think at this point that police officers are trying to catch him in the act, right? They know the profiler got this right. I mean, they probably looking at the train stations, probably following the bus stations. So what are they doing after all these murders after 89?
Well, so in 1990, they add even more officers to their task force, including undercover female officers. Again, they deploy them to train stations, bus stations. They equip them with cameras, surveillance equipment. They're trying to catch the killer in the act. Public pressure is increasing. Political pressure is increasing. Law enforcement officials have been threatened with losing their job because they can't catch this guy. And yet, he murders 3 more victims during this time, ranging from a 31-year-old woman, the oldest victim we've seen yet, down to an 11-year-old boy. And there is just this massive police operation underway. At one point, 360 officers had been deployed to the larger train stations in hopes of forcing the killer to the smaller train stations where undercover officers were waiting. And then on October 27th, 1990, the body of a 16-year-old boy was found right outside of one of the train stations. On the same day, the 16-year-old was lured away and killed after receiving 40 stab wounds. So you can't have officers everywhere, but they tried to. And then again on November 2nd, 1990, a 22-year-old woman was killed outside of another train station. But this time, an undercover officer observed the man approach a water well, and wash his hands and face. The officer didn't think about looking for a victim. I don't know why.
Okay.
But the man the officer reported had grass and soil stains on his clothes and a red smear mark, blood on his face. But the officer felt he had no reason to arrest him, so he simply ID'd him and filed a report. But that was going to be the beginning of the end. When Andre talked to the undercover officer, he was able to talk his way out of the muddy clothes and the bloodstained face, and the officer
Unbelievable. Well, and you know that, I mean, that's the thing. It's the officers know about this guy. They're deploying officers all over the bus and train stations at this point. And then you see the blood. It's I don't know, missed opportunities. I don't know what's missing here. Why they just won't. Do you know what I mean? Like, this guy just keeps getting away in broad daylight, murdering boys right outside this train station. And then he's seen with dirt and grass all over him and blood, and nothing is done. It's just unbelievable. Well, but hopefully they're closing in on this guy.
Well, when the report was submitted, they said, why didn't you arrest him? He said, what was I going to arrest him for? Having mud on his clothes? And they said, did you search for a victim? And he was like, no. I saw the guy washing his face. You know, it was pretty clean by the time I got there. He said he was out looking for his dog in the woods or whatever. They start searching around the train station. And after 7 days, they find the body. Task force members, of course, had the name from the earlier report and listed him and said, now we've got a real suspect. They checked his employment records, and what did they discover? That this guy has been traveling around from town to town, city to city, rail station to bus station, where these victims are turning up. And they started to close the net on him. They placed him under 24-hour surveillance, and he was arrested by 4 undercover officers when he attempted to make contact with several children in the park. So he continued, even after all this, to hunt victims, but didn't know he was under surveillance. And when he approached the young children in the park, officers swooped in and picked him up.
Thank goodness. Okay. So are they testing any DNA at this point? Do they have DNA? We talked about the blood type. How are they going to, does he give a confession? What is he saying and doing at this point?
Well, so they bring him in again. They test his blood, saliva, and semen again. And lo and behold, in an anomaly that let the killer go free, right, years before,
right.
His semen was type AB, which they knew. They said, hey, remember, we have that. But his blood and saliva were type A. So that's why they didn't match before. And it's very uncommon, but it can happen. And in his case, it allowed him to kill so many more victims because now that they know he has the dual blood type, right, A and AB, they place him under arrest and tie him to at least 14 of what is now 38 known victims.
I had no idea you could have 2 types of blood. No idea.
Yeah.
No idea.
Well, I guess it can show up one type again in your semen, but it shows up another type in your blood and your saliva. I didn't know that. Obviously, law enforcement didn't know that. Medical folks at the time probably weren't brought in to specifically look at that. So you can see how the police, a long time before went, we think we got the killer, but no, his blood type doesn't match. We got to let him go. Not knowing that this anomaly could happen.
Okay, John, so we know that they are at least saying he's responsible for 14 of the 38 known victims, but we believe there's many more than that. Is he talking at this point? Is he confessing to these crimes? What is he saying?
Yeah, he really wasn't at first when they arrested him, and I thought this was fascinating. Remember that prosecutor years before who did the criminal profile and actually hit it right on the head, right? That this guy was a traveling salesman, that there was a production schedule, that he was going to these locations and buying materials. So when they confronted him with the 65-page psychological profile, he thought it was amazing. And he actually confessed to 36 of the 38 murders and gave details of each murder, even drawing sketches of various crime scenes and how he positioned the victims' bodies. He admitted to things like tying the boy's hands with pre-cut rope before killing him, and that he performed sexual acts with females while stabbing them until they're dead or until he was sexually satisfied. So when confronted with the profile, not only did he admit to everything, he was almost proud of it and gave investigators detailed statements and detailed sketches of the crime scenes and what went on at each crime scene.
Proud of his work. Sounds like he was proud of his work. Yep. Okay, so cannibalism comes up in this case. Why? What did they find out and what did they know?
Yeah, during the trial, and again, Brandy, what was turning him on? At first, maybe the rape, maybe then it escalated to the murder. Certainly, there was a long period of time that torture was what turned him on and satisfied him. Matter of fact, he said that. I had sex with him and stabbed him until either they were dead or I was satisfied. So they started asking him about the missing body parts. And he said, well, you know, I kind of like the taste of blood. And I began eating the body parts. So that's where they were. He wasn't taking them, keeping them as souvenirs. He was actually consuming some of the body parts. And later he admitted to 20 additional killings that the police weren't even aware of. They didn't even know about these killings, and he led them to dump sites where they actually recovered some of the bodies.
Wow. Okay, so the cannibalism, that's another level, right, of that we see. And then 20 additional. Golly. So what is that? 58, almost 60 at this point? Yep. And is that even it? You know, that's the thing. Does he even remember where they all are? You know, traveling so much, but gosh, you know, giving them and leading them right to the dump sites. I don't know. Again, proud of his work. They wrote, you know, they did a psychological book and profile on him, and he thought that was amazing. Let me add to your story type of thing. Right. Is what he's doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Did he go to trial?
Yeah.
Did he go to trial?
He wasn't, you know, insane. They said he had a personality disorder and was sadistic, but they also said, no, you're fit to stand trial. They placed him in a specially built steel cage to protect him from the families of the victims who wanted to kill him. And during the trial, he acted absolutely crazy, often taking off his clothes and exposing himself and singing nationalistic anthems before finally being removed from the court. The judge found him guilty of 52 murders, and he was sentenced to die for each one of them. But the judge also severely admonished the police and prosecutors for their inability to catch this killer. How many times did he get away? Over and over again. And like we've seen so many times, it just raises the victim count. Finally, on February 14th, 1994, he was executed. And so that is the end of his story, but not before dozens and dozens of horrific murders. As we put a cork in this edition of our True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind all the listeners that you can follow us on all of our socials at JJ True Crime and Wine. JJ True Crime and Wine. And you can sign up for our True Crime Wine Club at casarowines.com. Just go to the True Crime and Wine page. And finally, if you'd like to get any of our great logoed merchandise, like the top of the wine barrel I have behind me with the daggers and the wine glass, you can find that at Shop True Crime. Shop True Crime. You can find all your logo merchandise. We've got t-shirts, hoodies, hats, all kinds of things for you. Of course, wine glasses. So as we wrap up business for today, I want to thank, of course, my co-host Brandy Diamond for joining me on this journey, and our producer, Lauren Bedsole, back in the Corsicana Command Center for making this show possible. And we'll see each one of you on the next episode when we present the Happy Face Killer. You may have seen it on a recent television show. You may have heard about it, but this is a truck-driving serial killer who signed his crimes with a happy face. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us today for True Crime and Wine. Salud.